Hello and welcome. I have a very special story for you today. It's a two-parter. We're going to be discussing from the saints who built America, how sacred foundations shaped 200 years of U.S. history. These stories will include the Mormon Nightingale who helped the Donner Party, and how California became so successful as a farming state. Let's learn something new, shall we? During the first years in California prior to the gold rush of 1849 and the influx of the 49ers from the east, the saints worked together to solve many problems that arose. Firstly, the growing season was different from the eastern states, and flooding was often problematic for the fields. Swarms of grasshoppers and herds of wild cattle often threatened to destroy crops soon after planting. And malaria had recently been introduced to the mosquito population by an unwitting French explorer. John Horner wrote in his first planting efforts in his journal, "At the mission in March I plowed and sowed wheat, barley, peas, and potatoes, and made a garden planted with different kinds of truck. All of this sowing and planting were of no avail, as the plants were destroyed by grasshoppers. Many believed it was impossible for California to sustain itself agriculturally by this time. However, Horner went out on his own as soon as the passengers disembarked and became the most successful farmer in all of California. He wrote of his first experiences after leaving the ship, called the Brooklyn. When I arrived in California, it was in the throes of a revolution. A war was raging between the United States and Mexico. I carried my rifle and pistol wherever I went prospecting, but seeing no one whom I wanted to shoot, and no one who wished to shoot me, I concluded my pistol was useless and traded it to a Spaniard for a yoke of oxen, the first animals I ever owned. With them I plowed for my first crop of vegetables in California." Horner began crop experiments at the old Spanish mission in the present-day city of Fremont, working to develop crops that would handle the different and unknown climate of California. Not long after, Horner was successful and planted many acres. His crops saved many of the more than 250,000 miners that would flood San Francisco Bay in the years after. His labors prevented starvation, malnutrition, and scurvy. Horner went on to win awards for the quality of his crops, which convinced others of the viability of California's land. His agricultural business made him another of the first millionaires in that part of the country. Of his experience, Horner wrote, "Flour mills not being sufficient in California at this time, we built one at Union City at a cost of $85,000 and ground our grain and that of others. We equipped and ran a stage line in connection to our steamer as far up the valley as San Jose, 25 miles, thus completing a through passenger line from San Francisco to San Jose. We opened 16 miles of public roads, mostly through our own land, and fenced parts on both sides. We spent considerable money on this land in surveys, fencing, and improvements. Some 600 acres adjoining the city as it then existed, we laid out in lots, blocks, and streets, and made them conform to those already laid out by the city." Horner continually made advancements and improvements to the land and the community as he developed his farming business, which proved more valuable than mining gold. At one time, Horner sent his brother William back east to import 300 grafted fruit trees, packed in moss and charcoal, and carried across the Isthmus of Panama by mule, then shipped to San Francisco. He also imported the first combine harvester and revolutionized large agricultural farming in the region. During these efforts, Horner also built ferries and the first roads and bridges, connecting towns and laying out the foundations of others. John, with his brother William Horner, are credited with laying out the towns of Centerville, Washington, Fremont, New Haven, Irvington, West Union, and others. But he also shared his knowledge and wealth with others. His personal campaign to educate farmers moving into the region made California the world's leading wheat producer. Horner also financed many startups and supported immigrants moving to Salt Lake and missionaries going out into the world. Later, he would move with his family to the islands of Hawaii and continue farming. His economic principles were adopted by the legislature of the Kingdom of Hawaii and the government of Egypt, and he was elected to the House of Nobles of the Kingdom of Hawaii. John Horner was not the only one to make a considerable mark on the territory. Caroline Augusta Perkins Joyce was one of many who later relocated to the new town of San Bernardino with other Latter-day Saints from the Brooklyn and the Mormon Battalion. Caroline had an excellent voice and became wealthy with her fame as the Mormon Nightingale. When fall arrived in 1850, a cholera epidemic struck San Francisco, killing as many as a dozen people every day. Caroline went about town finding orphaned children and taking them into her care. At one time it was recorded she was caring for 50 children at once. Caroline thereafter founded an orphanage and worked to support the children and find them homes. She further aided settlers in St. George, Utah by sending cuttings and root crops to the settlement. Caroline later moved to St. George and assisted with the establishment of the silk industry that the women of the Relief Society were developing there. Throughout the 1840s, immigration from eastern states to the territories of Oregon and California had been undertaken by a growing number of settlers interested in what the West might hold for them. Some felt that California offered a chance to live among well-established Catholic communities and hoped to join them. Others, such as Lansford Hastings, saw the undeveloped potential of the land upon his visit to the country in 1842. Till then, most venturing overland took the Oregon Trail, established by the Lewis and Clark expeditions, but Hastings thought a more direct route would be found. He published his proposed course through the Sierra Nevada mountain range, across the Salt Lake Desert, and through the Great Basin. This course, which became known as Hastings Cutoff, was eventually undertaken by members of a departing wagon train of nearly 500 wagons in the spring of 1846. They would set out from Independence, Missouri, along the Oregon Trail, and those who elected to take the cutoff proved slower and longer than the established trail. Timing would be critical to ensure the migrants would not be stopped in mud during the spring runoff or caught in heavy snowfall in the mountains during the fall. The Sierra Nevada mountain range is particularly challenging, dotted with peaks over 12,000 feet, extremely steep on the eastern slopes, and subject to some of the deepest snow due to proximity with the Pacific Ocean storms. Along the way, the Reed and Donner parties experienced significant setbacks and disorder among its ranks. They would become trapped for months in the mountain pass following an early snow that would not let up for weeks. Word of the stranded Donner Party eventually made it to California. There, Samuel Brennan quickly secured donations to fund the rescue operation. He sent wagons with supplies and arranged for families to take in the survivors. However, Oakley of the Brooklyn was among the last rescuers and carried 11-year-old Mary Donner on his back to safety. Caroline Joyce and her family nursed and housed some of the survivors. Frank Ward, who was running a ferry service, also made use of his launch for the Donner rescue. Of the 87 members of the party, 48 survived with significant scars from frost as well as emotional damage. Most of the survivors were children. There was no telling what might have become of them had the battalion and voyagers of the Brooklyn not been there to aid in their rescue and rehabilitation. At the next season thaw, 15 battalion boys, as they came to be known, who had been selected to accompany General Kearny's escort of Captain John Fremont back east for his court-martial, came across the remains of one of the Donner Party's campsites and buried the remains. A tragic story in U.S. history. Many people are very familiar with the Donner Party, but almost none are aware that Latter-day Saints, Mormons who had come around the southern tip of South America by ship with families in tight quarters, spending 6 months in that voyage to arrive and be the first settlers to enter the San Francisco Bay. It is estimated that around 60% of U.S. citizens have no opinion of Latter-day Saints. This is largely due to the fact that they don't know anything about them. Their history is forgotten, buried, or ignored. But the Latter-day Saints have contributed more to U.S. culture, society, policy, politics, than any other organized group of people in the history of the world. Now, you may be surprised to hear such a claim, but I have 600 pages of receipts that you are welcome to peruse, with citations included. If you choose to support me in this and get a copy for yourself, know that all of your support goes towards the production of a docu-series to make this book and its contents more available to the world. I have plenty more stories to share, so stick around until then.